Hi, folks. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Very pleased to be welcoming everyone here in Victoria, the ancestral territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and home to the Songhees and the Esquimalt. And we at CUI, I am with the Canadian Urban Institute and happen to be in Victoria this week for CUI Local. We've had just a fantastic 24 hours, I've got to say. We, those of you that are old enough to remember, old enough, listen to me, you may remember that TEDx started, and it was TEDx, and then they would put, if you remember when TED first started, it was just a big international conversation, and then they started to realize, oh, I guess we should start thinking about local, and so they went TEDx Philadelphia, TEDx Toronto, and that's where we got CUIX. So we really appreciate people taking the time to have these conversations with us, and for us to have a chance for the rest of the country to learn from the Victoria experience, what it is that's working, what's not, what's next. We commenced this program through COVID, and there were lots of early conversations about all the challenges that COVID was posing, but we found over time, we've also been able to surface all the things that are working well in areas where local practitioners, people involved in city building, can share with the rest of the country. Here are some things that we're grappling with, and here are the solutions that we're coming up with. So I love the title of this session. It's about hope, it's about action, and I love the notion of echoing, and that I will say that I think that the Victoria perspective that we're already starting to try to absorb is this idea that we can learn through our history, and that we can come to terms with the kinds of patterns of injustice that colonialism have reinforced, and which lamentably a lot of city building practice have reinforced. So we are at CUI taking seriously, how do we listen to each other? How do we journey together? How do we address the ways in which we may structurally and culturally be reinforcing racism and different kinds of colonial practice? So I appreciate people coming on this session to talk to us about the Black experience and the implications that should have for us engaged in this kind of communal place making called cities. So our Mayor Helps from Victoria is our hostess this morning. And we have, as I said, people coming in from across the country who we're just kind of waking up here over here in Victoria, but the rest of the country's been going for a while. They're on their third coffee, so they'll be ready to hear everything that you guys have got to say. And I'm going to listen with great interest. Everyone knows, I hope you know, the way this works is that you can see us, but we can't see you. So we hope you'll use the chat. Check in with us, tell us where you're watching from. If you have any questions or comments that you want to raise, please put them into the chat, and I'll send them over to Mayor Helps, or she'll see them herself. And we record these conversations, and then we post them later for people to really get a chance to listen and learn. And a lot of people do, believe it or not, they go back hours later and days later, and they have a listen. So, and the same with the chat. If you've got ideas or resources you want to put into the chat, please put them there. And we learn a lot. We learn a lot through all the different ways in which we communicate together, including social media and then these vehicles. So thanks everybody for coming on. And Mayor Helps, over to you to steward this conversation. And thanks to the folks to join you. And I'll come back at the end and thank you. I'll thank you before, and I'm going to thank you again.
Okay.
Over to you, Mayor Helps.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. I also would like to acknowledge that we're here today in downtown Victoria on Lekwungen lands, the home of the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And we spent our entire day yesterday and part of Sunday immersed in Lekwungen learning about Indigenous economics, Indigenous field school, Indigenous law. It really was a great way to ground our first day. And this is the first plenary on the second day of CUIX Victoria. Equally important to have these wonderful people and their voices and experiences today. So I'm not going to introduce all of them because the wonderful folks at CUI are going to post their bios in the chat. Please read their bios. And as Mary said, we'd love this session to be as interactive as possible. So use the chat, put your questions, comments, as Mary said, any resources that you want to share about projects that you might be working on. And the chat will be preserved along with a video for the rest of the world to see on the CUI page once we wrap up today. So I want to thank all of our panelists for coming on. And Mary said she liked the title of the session. Well, that's good, because the title of the session is the reason we're here today, which is a exhibit at the Royal BC Museum, which was co-convened by the museum and members of the Black community. For the first time in its history, the museum handed over curatorial authority to the community. And that's what we're here to talk about today, dive into some of the complexities, the challenges, what worked, what didn't, and some lessons that those of us like myself and others who are working in institutions, what lessons can we take about working with communities who have been historically and presently marginalized. So, I should say, for those of you in Victoria, if you haven't seen the exhibit yet, don't worry, you can go. It's free, it's open to the public, and it is open all the way till March 2022. So with that, for those who haven't yet been to the exhibit, I'd love all of our panelists to just describe it for us a little bit. Tell us what is there, and then we'll get into how it came to be and the challenges along the way. But I'll open it up to whoever wants to begin. Just tell us a little bit about the exhibit. Okay, Sylvia, I'm going to. Oh, Josh. Okay, over to you.
No, sure. I'd be happy to just to give you a little sense. I think hopefully what's been achieved is an immersive experience that kind of ties together the historical media, the material culture, and the contemporary response to that historical media, where the viewer is embedded in the experience and becomes a thread that weaves the timeline from past to present. The exhibit is meant to combat the whitewashing and erasure of Black Canadians through celebration of the richness and diversity of our history and our contributions. And again, with the name, Hope Meets Action echoes to the Black Continuum, we find a sense of empowerment, hopefully assertion of our belonging and our identity, and kind of just daylighting the Blackness and the rich contributions. But I'm also interested to hear, what the president of the BC Black History Awareness Society has to say about it.
Okay, Sylvia, give us your perspective on what is in the exhibit. Tell us for those who haven't been there yet.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Well, just have told you the intellectual aspect of the exhibit, but also there's a lot of color, there is a lot of lights, there is a lot of, it's very welcoming. I'm talking to you now in the emotionally aspect of it. There's a lot of light, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of places where one can start to research, right? So there's a lot of referencing points where one can continue with the studies if they are interested, but it's beautifully done. We had very good people working in it, the people at the museum, as well as the people from the BC Black History Awareness Society, Josh and Rodney, that's it. Sorry, my mind just went blank. Yeah, so yeah, it's a very beautiful exhibit. So if you have the chance, the opportunity, bring your family and enjoy.
Thanks, Sylvia. Chris or Charity, anything to add about what is there physically in the museum? We get some sneak peeks a little bit with Chris's green screen behind him, but Charity, what do you want to say about the exhibit itself?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. I think the exhibit is so beautiful, and it represents so many of us that aren't often represented. But one of the things I love about it is just how many different mediums of art are actually showcased in the exhibit. There's obviously the visual, there's audio, there's some videography. So there's kind of something for everyone, and if you can't grasp one art form, there's another for you to look at. So it's really amazing, and I encourage all of you to take a visit.
Thanks, Charity. Chris, anything to add?
Sure. I'll just start by saying a thanks to CUI Victoria for convening this session, giving space for us to talk about this exhibition, and Mayor Helps for moderating today too. As you said, Mayor Helps, the city, the museum is within Victoria. It's on the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, especially as I'm a learning program developer here at the Royal BC Museum. Every action we do needs to be grounded in that connection to where we are and the people that have stewarded this land for time immemorial. And where I am right now is actually in my office, but I do have a green screen that shows the front of the exhibition. With the exhibition is in two general locations in one larger location in the main lobby of the museum. So just to let people that know that are in Victoria that you don't need to pay to get into the museum to see the exhibition. It's accessible, and even if you're on a lunch break, if you want to come over and spend time, there's so much to see within it, and there's so much warmth even like within what's said and what's displayed. I keep getting that comment from people, from visitors and from staff about how the colors everything is so welcoming about it and enveloping about it. So.
Great, thank you, Chris. So for those of you who tuned in today, thanks for doing so. And we're going to start with some of the kind of the background, the easier questions. But what we've committed to is we're not just going to talk about all the good and all the easy parts. We want to make sure that we push into some of the difficult challenges that happen along the way. But we will just start off with a general question. And this is to Sylvia, who, as you have heard and seen in the chat, is the president of the Black History Awareness Society. Sylvia, can you just tell us a little bit about how this exhibit came to be? What was the idea behind it? You know, how did the idea come forward?
Okay, I'm gonna have to give the credit to Chris. Because although Chris knows me personally, and we have known each other for a long time, from a program that he did at the museum called Sleeping at the Museum. So I went there with my son. My son was 6 years old, and we spent the night there. And so that was the connection with me and Chris, instant, right? And then I became the president of the BC Black History Awareness Society, and other things got us together to work in different projects. So when he approached me and the BC Black History Awareness Society to do this work with them, it was a no-brainer for me. And that is why I think it's very important to build bridges. And there are so many ways in that you can build bridges. In my case, it was started personally, and then it became professionally. So when Chris approached to me, I trust him so much because I have worked with him. I know his team. I know everyone. That despite of all the allegations that the museum was having at the time, I said, you know what? People are going to criticize you no matter what, right? So you might as well do what you think is right and what you feel in your heart. So I thought it was right, and what I felt in my heart was to work with Chris and his team. So yes, so we say yes to his idea, to his project, and but we said yes, we will work with you, but it's going to be different this time. You know, this time it is us, it is our voices, it is our input that is going to go into the exhibit, and only that way we will have it. And Chris Chris doesn't say this, but to me, it's something that stuck with me. When I met Chris, he said to me that his father was a teacher, and he was a teacher in the, Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, at the inner city in Philadelphia. And that really gave me a perspective of who Chris was, right? And plus, he's an excellent dancer. He never says that, but he's a trained dancer. So yeah, so a lot of things about him that really make me think of him as a quality person. So yeah, so I had to put all my trust in him.
Interesting, really good information and good takeaway for all of us that those personal relationships are so important. Thank you, Sylvia. I want to go next to Charity and Josh, just to tell us a little bit about your roles in creating this exhibit. So Charity, I'll start with you. How are you involved?
Thank you. Well, I started working with BC Black History Awareness Society last year. And when I heard that this exhibit was happening, I just felt like I had to be involved, and I felt like it was a place where my voice would be heard, and it was also a place where I could work with all BIPOC folks and do something really beautiful in Victoria on the Kawangan territory. So my role, I guess, was more of a supportive role, and really just encouraging that the process of this exhibit would be done differently, like how Sylvie was alluding to. But I really wanted to make sure that this exhibit was done by us and for us, and the viewer experience for me, and I think maybe for the group, was second to our experience and the experience that POCs would have coming to this exhibit. And so I thought that was really important to me. But yeah, my role was just to support Josh and Rodney and kind of to, you know, bring a insight from the community, and as much as I hate calling myself a youth, the youth community. So yeah, that was my role, just kind of supporting everyone and giving people kind of a little kick in the butt when we might have been going in the wrong direction.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. And I think the support people are as important. You're kind of the architecture holding up the process, all the people who are supporting it. So thanks very much for sharing that. Josh, what about you? What was your role? How did you come to this project, and what'd you do?
So I am the writer and curator of the exhibit, but I want to say that, you know, Charity's a little bit underselling herself because she's also a star of the exhibit. We have a very touching interview. And furthermore, that you know, though I am the writer and curator, my work was not possible without the, you know, community engagements that we had at the beginning, where we listened to the community and heard from them what they wanted to see, which really gave me both the pressure and responsibility, but also the material to build. And then, as Charity alluded to, the continual you know, focus of Charity, specifically to keep our feet to the fire and keep an integrity to the process, as well as the tremendous resources and work, you know, over the years that the BC Black History Awareness Society has done, which was a plethora of resources. You know, and maybe just to further that, which was just that, you know, a little bit about that process was, you know, we talked about how this exhibit came about, and I think it's important to note that, you know, the integrity of this process was slightly in the face of course, some of the calls of systemic racism that were happening, and I don't want to underplay how much that is a reality, that it was and is systemic racism inherent in these institutions, that there historically has. And, you know, I think this is a first step and a quite exciting one on this decolonial journey that we're on. And yeah, I think so. Just to summarize it all, you know, my contribution was kind of a community mouthpiece to reflect on the ancestral themes, you know, to the echoes through the Black Continuum, and yeah, to curate and write that.
Thanks, Josh, and really good point. This is it's a wonderful exhibit, as we're all hearing and learning about, but it's the first step of probably decades-long work that needs to be done. On that note, I'm going to turn to Chris and ask you, from your perspective at the museum, what was the museum's approach to this collaboration, and how was this different from what you've done in the past?
Yeah, so this exhibition space is a space that we opened up a few years ago as a space for staff to share their research. Actually, let me if it's okay, I'll just take a step back. So for those who are joining in that don't know about the museum, so the Royal BC Museum is a provincial museum in BC. It's the Royal BC Museum and BC Archives. And the idea is that the museum explores, investigates, and amplifies the stories of BC, which is and so that's done with the galleries, and it's also done with the collection. And there's about 7 million objects, specimens, belongings, images, and documents within the collection. To tell the stories, the multiple layers of stories of a province is an impossible task. And especially, it's a complicated task within an institution like the Royal BC Museum, which is like breathes the air of colonialism and is like born out of the soil of colonialism. So that's as he said, this is a decades-long process of dismantling something that like needed to be dismantled yesterday. But it's a process, and it's a process that idea of telling the stories. There's a shift in that acknowledging the fact that there are so many stories. It's an impossible task to get to that place of telling the amount of stories that need to be told. And then also who is telling the stories is like crucially important to the work that needs to go forward. Not just this museum, but museums everywhere. So this shift in this space where Hope Meets Action is, as I said, was a shift from grounded in the work of staff and their research within the collections to being more of a space to amplify the voices of community, and not just what museums in the past have done is to tell the story of community. This is creating space for a community to tell their own story. It's not the museum's place to tell that story. That nothing about us without us is like flowing. It needs to be flowing through the work of all museums. So for us, it was really important also not to assume anything. We had an idea that we know what is not being told in the museum, and we know that through working with community groups and getting a sense from them like what's missing within the museum. And we realized that one of the main gaps of the museum, and when the museum does not do justice to the rich and vibrant history of Black communities in BC. So through that connection, as Sylvia was saying, through that connection that myself and others here at the museum had with the BC Black History Awareness Society, the first step was just to reach out and say, is this something that you think we should be doing? Is this something that you would be interested in leading on? And not assuming that the answer would be yes. And not assuming the answer would be continued yes all throughout the process. And continually checking in to say, like, is this okay? Is this okay that we still continue this? Do you feel okay with the direction that we're going? Is this just always checking in and not assuming? And so, yeah, Sylvia and the entire BC Black History Awareness Society was incredibly generous throughout the process to engage. And then through that work, last thing I'll say is through that work of working with Sylvia and Fran at the BC Black History Awareness Society, hiring Josh and Rodney Hazard, the designer for the exhibition, was a crucial part of this process to find two just unbelievable, extraordinary, like human beings and creative forces was what propelled this process forward.
Thanks, Chris. In terms of what was going on at the museum at the time, Sylvia alluded to this a little bit earlier. So while the exhibit was in the works, there was an investigation underway looking at racism at the very highest levels of the museum. And I'd like to ask Sylvia and also Josh and Charity, how did this impact your feelings about the work? How did this, was there a big shadow over the process? How did that feed in? Did it make you want to run in the other direction? And the reason I'm asking the question is all of our institutions are systemically racist, and these investigations and this information is really important to get out. And so just wondering though, at the same time as you're working on this exhibit, this investigation is happening. So just, if you could talk, Sylvia first, and then Josh and Charity, a little bit about what was that like? How did that affect this process? How did you feel?
That is a really good question. I want to start by talking about the system, the systemic racism, because a lot of people out there don't understand that. Now, if I would have gone to the CEO of the museum and said, I would like to have a Black exhibit here, what do you think the answer would have been? Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. That doesn't mean that the community shouldn't go to the big institutions and ask and demand and request. But a lot of people think that things are not done because we, the community or the groups, don't want to do it. But most of the time it's because we are not allowed to do it. The system is not open. So for those that follow baseball, for example, I don't know. So every year, and I hate this, every year, the first baseball player, they say, the commentators say, oh, he was the first Black person that broke the race of the barrier of race in baseball. He didn't do anything. He was just a good player that was allowed to play. Somebody wake up that morning and said, let's allow Black people play baseball. And that is how he became the first player. But can you imagine in those days, if he walked in the field and said, I want to play, what would have happened to him? Right? So that is systemic. That is control, and it's only open when a person normally that is in power feels like it's time to open it. But as I said, that doesn't mean that the rest of us, we shouldn't demand and we shouldn't ask and we shouldn't put our foot forward always. So now about what the museum was going through at the time, I just didn't care. Honestly, that wasn't going to stop me from having this great opportunity realized, right? So the museum has problems and they have to fix it. And this exhibit will show that the only way we can overcome that what separate us is by working together. And that was what I had in my mind and in my heart, and that is what propelled me. And also, of course, my team and Chris's team.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, that's first of all, a really helpful way to put systemic racism into a really plain example. And it's interesting to think about what would have happened maybe if Chris weren't at the museum, or if it were 10 years ago, or even right now, and the Black History Awareness Society went to the museum and said, we want space in the museum to tell our stories. And I think that we'll know that systemic racism is being dismantled when the invitation doesn't always have to come from the institution. So that's a really interesting insight. I appreciate you sharing that. To Josh and then to Charity, did this investigation that was happening impact your work, your feelings, your thoughts about the process?
Yeah, I have to say I have a slightly a different opinion, which is that I do think that, and I think that I'm not sure it is a different opinion actually. I think it's actually just elaborating on what Sylvia said, which is that I think that the community's pressure over years and decades, amounting to 2020, but really built on decades of activism, is what causes people in power to feel that pressure, the interest conversion that we talk about in critical race theory, where those interests converge when you put enough pressure on the institution. And I also, was quite alarmed by the calls, around the systemic racism. It was a moment where we all stopped and reconsidered what we were doing. I know I did. And I can say from that vantage point, I think the way that we ended up here in such a beautiful place arose through the integrity of the process, but also by going back to the museum and, in fact, building from our space. We were originally just in the pocket gallery and we were moved to a larger space. We had a larger commitment. We held the museum feet to the fire. We made sure that this integral process kept its integrity, because I personally, and I think most of us here, but I know personally that I was at that point very much questioning what, my role. I'm a community activist. I co-founded Hogan's Alley Society in Vancouver. I do a lot of community organizing, or so-called Vancouver. And it was only through, having an exhibit that had the leeway, but really leeway built on our calls, our grit, our decision to make sure that whatever we are a part of, we will be in full force to call out the museum for its history of racism, ongoing racism, to understand that. And again, I do think Sylvia's point's pointed because again, Chris and the people that I worked with were tremendous and have been tremendous, and warriors and leaders. But there is a systemic racism inherent in this institution. There's a history, and again, this was the first step, and I relied on that process, on the integrity of our community leanings, on the integrity of Chris's intention and those within the museum's intention to build an exhibit that was risky. It put everyone in a comfortable position. I'm glad to hear it was welcoming, but inherently, even in the framework, when I was building it, I wrote in the framework that it might be uncomfortable for some people, and so I am quite delighted to hear it's welcoming. I think that one of the processes of doing that that I'll share is that we really wanted to look at kind of the realization that people might feel. So we started with focusing on Black and BIPOC people and how their experience, and from there I looked, how can we decenter the white gaze and decenter whiteness in this space, and then how can we bring in the greater community and the white community. And one of those things was the realization that there was this history that's been hidden, that's been whitewashed, that's not been told. And then a reckoning of why hasn't this been told? And that's the reckoning of systemic racism, reckoning that we do live in a society that struggles with that. And then from there, we have a welcoming where we realize that Black Canadians have contributed to our society to a degree that which we can all share and feel, a kinship in that history. And so, that's kind of my thinking with that. And I'll pass it to Charity.
Thanks. And just before we go to Charity, Chris has put in the chat for those interested, the document that points to the investigation, the findings and the responses, just in case there are people who aren't aware what we're speaking of. It's all there in the chat. And also just a reminder in the chat, we've got lots to ask these fine folks from my perspective, but also at a certain point in the morning, we're going to turn to you and look for your questions and comments as well. So feel free to share those in the chat at any time. Charity, over to you. How did this overarching investigation happening at the same time as putting the exhibit together affect your work and your feelings and your process?
Yeah, I think it's I really agree with what Josh just spoke about, and I think we already know that the museum and really art is an inherently racist place, and it can often be uninviting, but I do think that the pressure, the years of pressure, and even just the most recent year, 2 years of pressure from the BIPOC community in Victoria alone, I think is really what was the catalyst for being able to have this space be our space. So I think I don't want to ever discredit the work that our community is doing to get to these places and to break down these barriers. However, when I started working with the museum, it wasn't shocking to me about the investigation, but what was difficult was the timing of it all and how exciting this exhibit was and is, but also knowing where this investigation is coming from and knowing that it's majority to do with the Indigenous community. On the Pauvin territory, and understanding that there's solidarity between our communities, and for me it felt like to work on this exhibit alongside the BC Museum felt like I wasn't acknowledging or giving enough precedent to the Indigenous folks who are running, kicking and screaming out of the museum, and also trying to really have them hold some accountability for their actions. So it was difficult for me to do any work past this investigation without without holding the museum accountable and without having those conversations and without bringing the team together and actually asking the question, like, is this something that we're comfortable doing moving forward? Is this something that is right for the community right now? I think ultimately that the answer was yes, and it was important to show up in the space and to take advantage of the space and the time but it wasn't an easy process, and I think it really put in perspective what we were actually doing here and how important it was. So yeah, I mean, it was difficult, and at times I felt like I was doing wrong by our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Sorry, my dog decides to join the conversation here, but I'm really glad that we continued. However, there's so much work that the museum space needs to do, and it shouldn't stop with us. And as grateful as and excited that we are that we had the space, there's actually a lot more space that needs to be cleared for the rest of the communities that are represented in Victoria. So.
Thanks, Charity. That's a really interesting and important point. They're in Victoria and probably in other cities across the country. I know that there are really strong linkages between Black and Indigenous communities, and so much so that, and it was wonderful to see this at the opening of the exhibit, Rose Henry, a community elder, Indigenous, had lots of space to sing and share and pray. And it was really, I think, a wonderful way to actually open the exhibit. So thanks for sharing that. It was almost like an ethical dilemma that you were facing. Yeah. I'm going to turn back to Josh. And Josh, you mentioned Hogan's Alley, which is the Hogan's Alley Society, which is, you can talk about that a little bit if you'd like to give those viewers who are here and don't know what that is, is part of the context of answering the next question that I'm going to ask you, which is you are a community curator. You're embedded in community. You do work like the Hogan's Alley Society. What was it like for you to be brought into this giant colonial institution like the museum? How was that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just one tidbit about, as you mentioned, Hogan's Alley Society, which some of that history and a history of the recent history of Hogan's Alley Society's founding is found in the exhibit, which I implore everyone to go visit. Is the Hogan Society advocates for Black Vancouverites who have endured the legacies of urban renewal and their erasure from the official historical narrative. Through our initiatives, we hope to build the capacity of racialized and marginalized communities to participate in city building. So Hogan's Alley Society was born out of kind of the displacement of the historic Black community in Vancouver called Hogan's Alley, or referred to as Hogan's Alley or Black Strathcona, and the movements to take down the viaduct that was across North America in the 70s and put into Black communities to destroy those communities. And in Vancouver, that was the case. And so when the city was taking down those viaducts and we did not see ourselves reflected in the, in the development plans, we came together to kind of bring all of our strengths and power and skills together as urban planners, as people who work in housing and all the different types of things to create an organization that would advocate that. A little bit of that history that might be relevant today was that the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation was complicit along with the city of Vancouver in purposely choosing the Black community to displace for the purposes of first the project of urban renewal, which saw the lack of services being rendered to that community, and a kind of a campaign of deciding that area was a blight, an urban blight, and in need of renewal. And then in the creation of the viaduct, which was then stopped actually a block later out of protest. In terms of joining this entire project, and in reference to some of the previous comments, again, as Charity said, I was quite excited, and then quite excited to finally be in an institution that was going to recognize this history that is so rich and that we've been fighting for so long, and to bring us and let us use our full voice there. At the opening, I won't show her name, but there was a descendant of many actually of the figures that we see there in the exhibit, a descendant of these historical great Black figures, who pulled me aside and thanked me for finally daylighting this history, and how much, that moment alone was kind of worth it for me, because that was what success looked like for me in this project, was having someone like that feel like this rich history has finally had its dues paid, finally had its recognition. In terms of entering, as a community curator, again, the process was what excited me most, that we talked to community, that the institution was willing to give space, that we had the backing of the BC Black History Awareness Society to really use our full voice. But there still are hiccups, as always. It's a new process for these institutions, similar to, for example, when we've done engagements for the city of Vancouver. There is a process by which the old rules need to be faced and pushed through, and we certainly face that in this process. But with the commitment from Chris and among others at the museum, and I think our real drive and people like Charity making sure that we stuck to our guns, it was quite a powerful role, and it had a lot of responsibility. Responsibility because this is the first time that we are bringing in this history into a formal institution and trying to represent community, and really that responsibility to do justice and to weave together a sense of belonging and community through intergenerational linkages. And just the last point here was that, again, to implore everyone to see the exhibit, because you cannot tell the history of Victoria without talking about the Black history. The beginnings of that city, at least colonially, are very clearly built upon a lot of Black labor, and it's often forgotten. And so trying to bring that history to life and weave it to the present and contemporary was something that I will continue to cherish.
Thanks very much, Josh. Just on that, before I go to a question for Charity, every day this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, as part of this session, and for those of us who are organizing, we had a Lekwungen walking tour, 2.5 hours with Songhee's knowledge keeper, Mark Albany, and he took us through downtown from the perspective of the Lekwungen people. And it would be really interesting, this is just maybe me seeding an idea for what's next, to have Hope Meets Action get out on the street, maybe as a follow-up, and tell the story of Victoria, like this site was built by these, because it was really, absolutely illuminating, and to look at the city through fresh eyes, in this case through Lekwungen eyes, but it might be possible to do the same thing looking at the city through the eyes of the Black community. Charity, I'm going to go to you next. You've been, even though you described yourself as a youth, which obviously you are, but you've also in your time been very active in Black, Indigenous, people of color communities in Victoria in many ways. You're, I think, a real community leader. So I wanted to ask you, how did the participation in this exhibit feel similar to, and also different from, some of the other activist work and community leading work that you've been involved in?
It actually felt quite different for me. I think a lot of the times when there's an ask from community or an invitation, there's often this like trickle of whiteness that kind of gets brought into the process, and it often can center whiteness, and it's kind of like this tug of war of trying to get as much as our experience and our voice and our story out there, but also to like create this comfort for white folks and the white gaze and the community. And so I think I've been lucky enough to be in so many different spaces within the BIPOC community this last year and a half. But I think this space with the museum was so different because like we've kind of all said, the process for us was the most important thing. And we made sure that at every step of the way, it was our voices and our stories coming from us in the room as the curators, but also coming from our community, like Josh alluded to earlier, that we had community engagement meetings and stuff to get everyone's input and everyone's story and what they wanted to see represented in the museum of them. And so this experience was and to be honest, I there were moments when it was a struggle and we really had to be like firm about what we wanted and what we needed for this to be successful for us. And it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always, asked and received instantly. But I think what really separated this is that it was like what you see in the museum, and for anyone who wants to go and check this exhibit out, what you see is what's brought by us. And there was nobody else's voice used but our voice and our community's voice. And that was the most important thing for me. For me, I think it's just kind of like what I've said to our group is, we can show that with art is so beautiful because it can mean so many different things. And I think like the process that we take to get to that point of it being shown and viewed by the public is the most important thing. And I think we can really use this as a framework moving forward in community of how we work with these institutions that are inherently racist, and how we get our stories across, and how we use their space to hear our voices, or how we create our own space, that we don't have to ask to be let in the doors, but we just create our own doors. And that's, I think a framework that we should continue to grow on and really activate moving forward. But yeah, it was definitely a different experience, and one that I hold a lot of value in, and just in the fact that it was our team. So.
Yeah, thank you. That trickle of whiteness, I wrote that down. I'm going to go back and watch the whole conversation because as facilitator, I have to kind of stay. But anyway, I made a note of that trickle of whiteness, and I wonder if it's almost like a thread of whiteness, that will the institutions will allow you, but still with that white thread kind of tying everything up. And it sounds like in this instance that didn't happen, and that's, I think that for me, that's a takeaway for those of us who work in racist colonial institutions, is to just cut that thread of whiteness and allow the process to be what it needs to be and the voices to come through. Thank you for that insight. The next questions I have are now for all of you. So we'll try and make this as seamless as possible in terms of who goes first, second, third, and so on. So and this is where we get into some of the challenges. So from your perspective, what were some of the hurdles or the difficulties or the challenges along the way, and how did you overcome them? And how did these challenges and the way that they were overcome make the exhibit better and stronger? So we've heard a couple of times people say Charity has held our feet to the fire. So what were some of the instances in which things felt a little bit like they were unraveling, and how was that dealt with, and how did that get overcome? So I'll just look to whoever wishes to speak first, and you can just unmute and then I'll know it's you.
I think the phrase earlier was butt kicker, right? Charity was like an amazing butt kicker throughout the whole process. And I think so I just wanted to come back to that, because those kind of moments where Charity would say, hey, like, are we looking at this the right way? Like, hey, can we like look at this a little bit deeper? Can we like look at this at another angle? That was so valuable and happens so often throughout the process. And I could only imagine like where we would have, like, I think we still would have come to a good place, but I think we would also have like maybe not come to the place that we needed to get to. So I wanted to say, I did want to say, just in terms of just from an organizational perspective in regard to the investigation, Josh was saying that decades of struggle came to this cultural moment in time, and that's so true. In our organization in particular, that was true. There's a lot of struggle both internally and externally, but a real crucial moment was the truth-telling and brave and courageous truth-telling of Lucy Bell. So I just wanted to make sure that that never gets lost in the telling of this particular story, and the important sort of work of certain individuals within the museum. And I think even within the process, there were times where the BC Black History Awareness asked for different folks from the museum to come in, one being Luann Neal, who is an incredible and important voice within the museum, and Michelle Van Thiel as well. Just to say, like, especially from a POC, Black Indigenous POC perspective from the museum, from inside the museum. So, because there were lots of times where I even, and I also wanted to say, like, I am representing the museum as this box on Zoom, but there were so many people within the museum helping move this process along. Dr. Tsui Chung, Genevieve Weber, Steve Lewis, Janet McDonald, and others. So I wanted to make sure that that there was a real core group of strong advocates and incredible sort of actors within this process for the museum side as well. But there were lots of times where I was like, you know, maybe we should just hold off on this, because this is. But I wanted to always, we wanted to always not just center the final product of the content, but center the process in not our voice, but the BC Black History Awareness Society, Josh and Rodney. So the process as well, to center their agency within this throughout the process. So, but then that also meant, like, we have to say, like, wherever this goes, it goes, and we need to just follow that. And that was okay. But it is a different sort of way of working than we typically do, which is good. We need to change that. So.
Thanks, Chris. Maybe I'll go to Sylvia next. I said I wasn't going to call on specific people, but what were some of the, and then Charity, I'm going to come to you to see where you kind of stepped in and kicked butts. What were some of the challenges that arose? And they may, you know, one of the reasons we wanted to hold this session as part of CUIX Victoria is so that others working in institutions can learn about from all of you how you pulled this off. And so, you know, as specific, and we also don't want to ask anyone to say anything that they're not comfortable sharing, but as specific as possible. What were the challenges that arose? If you can give us a couple examples, and then how did you work together to overcome those? And then I'll ask Josh and Charity the same question.
Wow. What, you know, because when I compartmentalize my brain when I work. So when I'm working, you know, I don't put much of an emotion when I work, because to me, it's not part of that. So to me, the most important thing was to get along with the team, with both, and then to get along with both teams. And to get along means to compromise as well. Right? Not always to think alike, or not always to have the same ideas, but to compromise and to then work out on those compromises or those disagreements, right? Those are the most important things for me, and to work in a team and to make that team successful so that the work can be successful. Because if you don't have a successful team, if you don't have a team that you can work with, you know, the work is not going to go out. It's not going to be successful. So to me, that was what the most important thing, to be honest with. Once I said yes to the museum, and once I made my commitment to work with the museum, the next step for me was to make sure that we were a successful team and that we work well together among ourselves and also among with the team at the museum. That was the most important part for me. And as you know, working with people can be very challenging, but to me, that was the most, to have that work well, to make a team strong. That was the most important thing for me in this process.
Great.
As the president, of course, right? Because I wasn't the artist or the curator or anything, but I wanted that project done and be seen, and I wanted excellent. I didn't expect anything less. So
that's great advice, Sylvia. So the advice then is put the effort into keeping the team strong, and whatever happens along the way, as long as the team is strong, will be able to be overcome. Before I go to Josh and Charity to talk about the specific challenges that you faced and how these were overcome and how it made the exhibits stronger, I'll notice that I note that there are some questions starting to come in, which is great. So if you do have questions, we can't see you. So someone apparently used the raise hand function. We don't know who's out there in the audience. So just put your questions into the chat if you address them to all panelists and everyone. All panelists and participants, because we want to turn soon to get some thoughts and questions from those who are participating today by watching and listening. Josh, the challenges that you see.
Yeah, I think that we all had different roles here. As you know, I think we've kind of foreshadowed here with mentioning Charity kicking the butt, because I kind of saw I viewed my role as actually not compromising. In fact, it was the title of my foundational interpretation document, was that we were going to enter this space, but of course my role was not the president, who is in a different role than me. My role was to represent the community, and I think that just on a larger scale, when we're talking about the hurdles that are happening when we deal with white supremacist institutions, white centering institutions, colonial institutions, there's a tremendous amount of emotional labor and tolls that are inherent in the process. People are going to get upset, unfortunately, because the old rules are no longer applying if we are committed to this process. There was my focus in that role was to make sure that no matter what, I continued to voice, to be a mouthpiece of our community and to voice a non-compromisable narrative and story in terms of dealing with, the old guard and to some extent, to the extent that it did exist in the process, was again, as Sylvia mentioned, treating everyone with respect and engaging with them and realizing that people's intentions, when we talk about systemic racism, people's intentions are usually quite good. People have good intentions. In my experience, both working with the museum and the city of Vancouver, with urban planners and different things like that, the intentions are usually, quite good. It's people aren't overtly racist or anything like that. But the institutional values and system causes people to inherently be set into roles that are confrontational or adverse to what what you're trying to accomplish if you're doing a decolonial exhibition. So by continuing to build trust and communication, but still sticking to our guns, there were times where I was asked to, because someone wasn't, one of the things I should clarify in the exhibition is that we talk from the voice of the Black community. We're talking we talk, say us, and we say our history, and we capitalize B on Black, and we don't capitalize W on white when we're talking about Black and white people, because of the inherent history of racism in academia and history and language and in these museums, and the focus of that in this is, it's not to say white, sorry, I should clarify that. It's when we're talking about white supremacy, the W is small, things like that. But when we're talking about Black people, we're elevating a history that has been erased, and so some things like that, for example, where even my editorial style guide was something new for, at least from the people I engage with, for the museum to see something like that, to talk about white supremacy, to talk about the museum being white centering, to use terms that make some people slightly uncomfortable. It's always a challenge, but reminding ourselves that the people that we're working with do have the good intentions, and if we continue to stick by our guns, if we continue to communicate where we're coming from, there's a lot that can be achieved, and as long as everyone's committed, as Chris pointed to wherever this leads us on this path of decolonization. So yeah, that's what I'd share.
Thank you. Charity, before I come to you, I see Sylvia put up her hand, so I'm assuming that she'd like to respond to something that Josh has said. Sylvia, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to respond. When I said compromise, I didn't mean with the exhibit or whatever is inside the exhibit. I was talking about, as a project manager, how do you deal with people? How do you make people work, right? That is the aspect I was talking about. In fact, I was very open and to how you guys wanted to whatever guy you wanted to do. And I think I was very supportive of what anything that has to do with the exhibit and the way you narrated this story, right? It's what I meant when I said compromise. It was within the team.
Thanks for clarifying that, Sylvia. Charity, challenges, difficulties along the way. What did you do? How were they overcome?
Okay, so specifically some of the challenges, well, let me just start by saying, and I think I've said this a million times, the process for us was most important. But with that, it was how we communicated with one another. And when we had, with Chris and the rest of the team that was in the main process of building the exhibit, we were in all the meetings together, and we checked in with one another, and we worked in a really decolonial way of, not being pressed for time and allowing storytelling to happen and allowing sharing to happen. And I think that's what created this dynamic of having that allyship with Chris and the rest of the team that was directly involved. And whenever anyone new would come on, I can feel this, not that it was a tension, but this just trying to hold on to the reins and hold on to the grasp of what their reality was and how they've continually worked in this environment. But because we were working from a completely different lens, it was really interesting to kind of have to re-explain how we were going to do this process and to change the way white folks were showing up into our space, because they were showing up the way that they would just show up normally in this work environment, but because we were doing things differently, you had to show up differently, and it often with that, with kind of what Josh was saying, it's a lot of emotional labor, and so it could be quite exhausting, and often, unfortunately, it falls back on Black women, which is a whole nother conversation. But as much as I was happy to kick butts and be very open and honest with what I wanted this experience to be and what I think we all wanted this experience to be, it wasn't an easy thing to do, to continually have to put myself out there and not know what would come back to me. And so just saying, it was, I was happy to do it, but it wasn't always very simple and easy. And but anyway, so there's specific things like Josh alluded to. When we first started working with the museum, we had the pocket gallery space, which was used previously as a closet space. And so when that was told to us, oh, this is the closet space, I hope you guys are excited to get, and it's just the language that is used, now it's used as a pocket gallery for, we're not the first pocket gallery to be in that exhibit, but because we're the first of our kind and of this nature, for them to use the language of, you're going to get this closet space, I think just to have that, the insight and the thought to say, I'm not going to call this a closet space where we're fitting in, we're trying to fit in so many different experiences and stories into this tiny little space. And so to ask and better demand, and to be honest, the demand of that space came when the investigation and that conversation was happening of how do we really assert ourselves in this space right now? And so acquiring more space was, I think, crucial to how this exhibit has turned out, and because it was how do we fit all of this beautiful storytelling into this closet space, into this tiny little pocket gallery. So that was a thing, and stepping outside of the little team that we had built with Chris and the others who were on our main team, stepping outside of that and people who weren't always in the room and hearing the reason why we were doing this. Like I said before, it was a tug of we need to do things differently. But I think that's the the problem with how these institutions are run is it's all very like mechanical and it's this way, like this is the right way. And now those are just really like symptoms of white supremacy. But when we unpack that and we unpack why we have to be pressed for time and why, you know, the like getting it done right is more important than the story and the experience and the voice that is telling it. I think the whole thing changes and you can, like, I felt like I can physically see people like releasing their grasp, like that power and what is the norm to them, just by having those conversations. And I think that, like I said before, that the framework for this is something that I think everyone should try to learn. And I think I think we documented a lot of our meetings and stuff like that. And like, I mean, I would say it's something that some of the conversations are obviously quite personal and because of the gravity of the storytelling. But I think it's something that should be shared because I think it's just really valuable and necessary that we work in that way. And to be honest, a lot of the ways that I've been able to find work is to work through, you know, just being connected with Indigenous communities and work through Indigenous practices. And that's how I've come to build work relationships and really decenter that whiteness. And so I think like really connecting with Indigenous communities in a very non-performative way and just in a way of wanting to learn and continue those deep, like, and rich practices is so important. And the only reason that, one of the only reasons that I was able to create the space for myself to show up and hopefully for everyone else to show up as they are.
Thanks, Charity. I'm going to go right to Sylvia, except I wanted to note that somebody sent you a heart in the chat for all that emotional labor that you did. So just wanted you to get that love. Sylvia, over to you. Sylvia, go ahead. Sorry,
I wanted to talk from my perspectives as from my organization perspective, right? The organization was created in 1995. I wasn't even here. I was in Europe somewhere being naughty, probably. But we have been going to schools year after year. You know, when a year starts, I make a list of schools in Victoria and I knock on doors. Okay? I have to knock on, and now I'm getting emotional. That's the part that I'm getting emotional. I have to knock on doors and I have to ask them, can we come and teach your children about Black history? All right. So when I became a member of this organization, I started in 2013 or 14, something like that. So I have been doing this every year. And so when Chris approached to me, so you can imagine from my point of view, how that felt, right? Because I thought to myself, wow, at last, we can have our story in a place where people can come and see, right? So now we have the space. We have the, somebody asked, how has the Black community reacted to the exhibit? You know, and it's so sad to say this, I haven't heard anything. It is so sad. But it doesn't finish here for me. This year already, I have 5 more organizations that I have to give a presentation. So to me, this exhibit it's not the end. It's not the finish line. I have to continue to do this work. I have to continue to spread the history of Black people in BC, you know, and it's really sad, you know, like, you know, it is really sad from my own people that I haven't heard anyone saying, oh no, I would lie, not anyone. So the people that participated in the exhibit, as well as some close friends of mine, but you know, nobody has, it is, but I think to myself, okay, that is fine, Sylvia, it's fine. As long as you have 1 or 2 people saying that is great, thank you for the space, you have to continue the work that you're doing. You have to continue strong.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Charity, back to you.
Just to add on to what Sylvia says, I actually think that the Black community has really, really, really enjoyed this exhibit, and I think a lot of people have found themselves in it. And I know I'm so thankful for Josh for allowing me to be actually in the exhibit, and I shared a lot of my own personal stories growing up in Victoria. As an athlete, as an activist, as a curator of, not to the extent of Josh, but something close. But I think, I mean, I've had a lot of people come up to me and share that, you know, just me sharing my experience really, really kind of connected with them. And I think often because, and this is one of the main purposes for the exhibit, but often because the Black community is so dispersed, it might feel like they don't see you, or they don't see us, or they don't see each other, but we're all actually here, like the exhibit says, and we've honestly been here for quite some time, and we deserve this space just as much as anybody else. But I think because there's that separation, unfortunately, amongst our community, it might kind of seem like you're alone, or you know, you it's hard to find that kinship. But we are here, and this you know, museum, this exhibit was excellent, and I think that's a testament to the work that Josh and Ronnie put into it, but also a testament to the work that the BC Black History and our community did, because this, like, you know, like we said before, this started from community. It started from community voices. So I would be shocked to see that the Black community didn't enjoy this, because it was the Black community who made this exhibit happen. So I'm saddened to hear, Sylvia, that you haven't had those interactions, because I've had them, and they're beautiful, and it's so amazing. And I'm so thankful to have been a part of, to be a part of the exhibit on both ends, as helping it happen and also being involved in it. And it's kind of weird to see my face in this place that I've always thought was quite racist and terrible, honestly. But it's really cool. And then what else is really special about it is people, other Black folks who might not have ever seen themselves in the museum, or even going to the museum to see the art, are like going to witness us. And so that, to me, is like the coolest thing, is like, I mean, the space isn't inviting to a lot of communities, but now there's a reason to go there, and a reason to feel pride and joy, and also a reason now to be able to see you know, the other creations that are in the museum, because there are some beautiful and Indigenous art there, and but it's kind of like you don't want to go, because there's just no representation. So now there's something for people to go and see, and you know, for other artists to see that this is something that's possible. And I mean, one of my very close friends, who was featured as a photographer in the museum, who was a Black photographer, just for clarity's sakes, everyone's work who's in the museum is Black, which I love, or the exhibit, sorry. But myself and himself could never have imagined his work sitting in the BC Museum, and now it is. So it's a really beautiful thing, and he brings his own community with him, and that community is so proud of his work. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we are here, we're proud, we love it, it's beautiful, and it's done by us.
Okay, awesome.
Can I add one thing to that?
Sorry, Chris. Sorry, Josh, and then Sylvia. They put their hands up in that order, so I'll go Josh, Sylvia, and then Chris. And there's obviously, this is generating a lot of excitement and energy. So Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, great words from everybody. You know, just a couple points, and off of what Charity maybe ended with first, which is that another thing that I think is important to note when working these dynamics with white institutions is that the community is the authority often on these things. So, for example, this photographer was a friend of Charity's, and that's a community, a sourcing of images, these powerful images, as you'll see in the exhibit, came from these, just a young photographer, but his work or their work, deserves to be in that place. And oftentimes when we do engagements with community, such as engagement we have to treat people who have this lived experience as authorities on the knowledge that they possess. Furthermore, as Sylvia pointed to, the years of knocking on doors definitely is disproportionately lay the groundwork for not only this exhibit, but my personal knowledge of the Black history in BC, of the material that we used. And lastly, just that, as Charity pointed to, the fragmented nature of our community as a result of a variety of practices, including urban planning, my immigration policy, economic and educational factors, does mean that, and as well as COVID, that we didn't see, maybe we haven't seen it at once the same mass of the Black community. But I do know over the internet and in Vancouver that the interest has been tremendous and the effect has been tremendous. We've seen, the exhibit featured on CBC, on the news. There is a History Channel a production that's going to be up on the History Channel next February for Black History Month on the exhibit. Not to mention just the amount of messages I've received from people who are excited and taking special trips out to the island to see it, and I'm so warmed by that. And again, it wouldn't have been possible without Sylvia knocking on doors, and without all those little stories that were seen as maybe not as important previous to now being highlighted, such as old teeny, little teeny over there behind Chris is someone we know very little about, but you can see quite an interesting story from what we do know, with Emily Carr mentioning her in her book. But the plethora of stories of such that people can connect with, is something that I think even my sister, who was born in Jamaica, was the only Black girl in her school for long periods of time, came and listened to Charity speak about her experience and cried. This is a grown woman, 40 years old, and she's, or maybe I shouldn't have given her an age up, but she trust me, she looks very young. She for her to connect with someone else who had that experience is, the alienation, but also the joy in finding your voice. And I imagine Black children, boys, girls, non-binary of all kinds, coming to listen to these stories of how people navigated this society, how people like Charity found their voice, such a strong voice under these conditions, because it helps us all understand how, as young people, how we can navigate this. I remember growing up and looking at other Black and biracial and mixed people and wondering how have they become these full confident people? And those are the stories that I hope echo through the continuum.
Thanks, Josh. Sylvia.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the exhibit is all Black, from this writing to the colors to the photograph to the videos. It's all Black. I grew up in Spain, and I grew up alone, right? When I was growing up in Spain, there was not Black people. And in fact, if you still go to Spain, you won't see any Black person working anywhere. All right, but of course, and yeah. So I guess I'm used to do things, and I used to do things in school, and I would have a lot of support, and but I thought I don't know. I thought the reaction for this exhibit, I guess I was expecting something else, right? Having grown up in a place where there's no Black people, and then coming here, and there's some more than when I was where I grew up. I don't know. I guess I was expecting people to be more helpful and people to be more in solidarity When I say people, I mean Black people, and I'm glad that Charity and Josh had found that warmth from our people and have found that people that have contacted them and say how good the exhibit was and good for their work. And I have had some too, but I have had few, but very sincere. I guess I was expecting something else, coming, as I said, coming from my background of being always alone and being the only one. And then to come in here and doing this work, because it's labor intense, it is. But as I said, the work doesn't finish here with the exhibit. To me, it continues. And to me, it's another door that I have to knock on, and another one and another one and another one. Yeah, so that's all.
Thanks for sharing that, Sylvia. Chris, I'm going to come to you. I think you wanted to react to something that Charity or Josh had said. And then I do have a couple of questions that have been sent to me privately in the chat. And then I'll ask one of those and then ask for some final thoughts. And then we'll invite Mary back to wrap us up, even though I think this is hard to say goodbye, although we recognize that you have busy lives and have other things to do today as well. Chris, what are your thoughts that you'd like to share at this point?
I was just going to say that since it's in the lobby and I pass by the exhibition all the time, I'm always like, oh, hi, Charity. Like Charity is present within the space always. And like, it's a true gift every day to be able to pass by her. And I was also going to say that in my experience so far, I'm noticing that people are sitting with it for a long time. So people will be, like I'll go to a meeting and then I'll come back, pass by it again, and that same person is still reading and still taking it in. So there's a lot of deep reading and listening and absorbing, which I feel very, I'm just really thankful for. And I also wanted to say just that recently what we've decided as a team, again, this is like make no assumptions, take step by step. And one of the things as a team, we've all decided that this exhibition will become a traveling exhibition. So once it's done here at the museum, it will actually go and can travel to the Lower Mainland, to other parts of BC, to other parts of Vancouver Island. And I'm really excited about that, there will be more eyes on this and more hearts on it. So, and with it.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go to one question that's come in from the chat, and then I have a couple of wrap-up questions, as I said, and then we'll go back to Mary. Some of you have touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth asking it explicitly. What role do you think arts and culture organizations can have in helping communities, societies, and cities confront tough challenges like like addressing racism and exclusion? So what's the role of arts in helping institutions and cities address racism and exclusion?
Coming from someone, like, I'm not an artist by any means, but I love all forms of art, and I love facilitating, and I love supporting artists share their lived experience and their voices. But I honestly think art, for me, I think art saves lives, and it's a beautiful way to connect with everyone, and it's a language that is spoken by everyone. And so I think being able, I think that the way that it will actually create the change, though, is being able to have complete agency over what you want to say and over your story. Giving the space, but just the agency. And like I said, that trickle of whiteness is what dilutes that story and is what can take away from that person's lived experience. But if we are able to get to a place where what I need to say based on what I've seen, based on what I've experienced, based on what I know, based on what is fact of society and institutional racism and white supremacy is told in that way and that way only, then we can start to create some change or even just some acknowledgement of what's happening, in other communities. And so I think the role that these institutions play is telling the truth, and that's really all we can ask for, and is truth telling and real in-depth storytelling. And so yeah, I think art activism is so important, and often with BIPOC artists or Black artists or Indigenous artists, all of the art is activism because it's just what we have to say. And so I think it's so important. It's one of the things that will save us, and one of the things that'll bring community together. And by community, I mean all of us. It's one of the things that will bring us together by just the truth that it has, and the impact that reading and hearing and seeing truth has on you.
Thank you, Charity. That's really, really well said and very thoughtful. Anyone else want to weigh in on the role of art? Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that, one of the things that I think we always talked about with this exhibit, and something we talked about in Hogan's Valley Society and in many cross places is the need for space and cultural spaces. And one of the things is about having Black space. It's something that Hogan's Valley represented as a community, but it's something that when you see in a formal institution, you have Black joy in a institution that has a history of systemic racism. Inherent in that is a subversive feature when we tell our own stories. Of course, it doesn't address every economical factor, but it does lend us a voice, it lends us a space, and it lends us an empowerment to be our full authentic selves in that space, which in and of itself is an act of subversion to a white supremacist system. And so, I commend the museum on this space, but I look forward to the city of Victoria, the museum, and the city of Vancouver on their path to creating more Black spaces, more BIPOC spaces that are specifically designated and designed to represent, and even in urban design representing, because culture is also created, it's supported, it's fertilized, and we have to do our due diligence to create those spaces.
Thanks very much, Josh. If no one else wants to weigh in on the role of art, Chris, okay, I'll go to you, and then.
Sorry, just briefly, because I'm just reflecting on once the exhibition opened, Charity organized a graffiti workshop here at the museum, and I'm looking at the panels actually right in front of me here, and I think that was a beautiful event, a 2-day event, and it really struck by how the arts also in any one community, it's not a monolith. There's so many different sort of perspectives within community as well, and that arts, because it could either be very explicit or it could be very implicit through abstraction and process, that you could say something very directly, or you could say something through other means. That creative process is really crucial. So yeah, whether that's public facing in terms of mural making within a city, or whether that's just creative process on a more individual level.
This is great. So some of the panelists have already anticipated the activity that is next. And this is for people who have joined us today. The CUI folks are going to put a Google form into the chat. If you have to go somewhere else now and you don't have time to fill it out, just please click on the Google form. We have 3 questions for you. One is, what is one thing you've learned today that you didn't know before coming? 2 is, what is one action that you can personally take based on the conversation that you've heard? And then 3 are, what other actions can be taken, and what steps can be taken, and who should take them? So we really have had a good conversation today, but we don't want the conversation to stop here. CUIX Victoria is about generating an action registry for all of the sessions we're holding, so we know what can be done. So Sylvia, I'm going to go to give the final word to you as the president of the BC Black History Awareness Society, and then over to Mary to wrap us up. Sylvia, go ahead.
My last message is for the system, the organizations, the government, the governmental organizations, the people that have the power. It's like, I challenge you to open your doors. I challenge you to let people in. I challenge you to be your best. I challenge you to get to know people. I challenge you to open up and to see and to compete and to see the excellence that is out there And I challenge you to give voice to other people. That's all.
Thank you, Sylvia. Charity, I see your hand is up. Is that a hand from before? Or did you want to say some final words? I'll turn it over to you.
I did want to say something quickly. I just saw someone in the chat mention something about investing and funding. And I think that's the most important thing is really investing into these communities and into these artists and opening the doors in that way, because there's a lot of, like we've alluded to before, a lot of free labor that is given, from Black community, but to really acknowledge is to invest and to put that funding and make grants accessible, make that environment accessible. And it's not enough to just invite us to the table and say, glad you made it, but like, we need to get paid for the work that we're doing. And I think that's the most important thing. And also just to add, we obviously know Victoria is quite a white dominant space, and along that is a lot of white walls and just a lot of plainness. And I think there's a lot of really talented artists just itching to paint this city and to paint it as their own. And I think opening up the doors for that and not closing that off because the city looks a certain way and people are comfortable here, but to really acknowledge the entire environment and the society that we are all living in, that there's color that I want to see in my work environment, in my meetings, in this, but also this color that I want to see on the walls. And I think that's something that we can really address as a city, because it's something that, I'm from Toronto, Ontario, and when I go there, I see myself represented everywhere. And I think it's beautiful. And I think if we were able to do that here, then maybe it would be easier to find Black community, because we would just be. So that's my final words. Money, monetize it.
Thank you. Thanks, Charity. Before I hand it over to Mary, and I know she'll do the same, I just really want to thank all four of you for your thoughtfulness, your generosity, and just for sharing so openly with all of us this morning. Mary, over to you.
What an interesting session you've given us, folks. Thanks so much for taking the time. I was particularly interested in the institution question because, of course, I work for an institution and we struggle with these questions too around inclusion and all the pieces that you've been touching on, and also what the role of art and culture is, because cities are all part of, that's critical components of cities are art, culture, but also economy, and how all the sessions that we're doing as CUI local and how it all stitches together. So thanks so much. And I appreciate, Charity, your comment, because I'm from Toronto. We know there are things to learn from each other. So you've given Toronto a really good opportunity to hear from you folks today about your experience. And I appreciate also, Chris, your comment that it doesn't stop with the exhibit. You're using your institution and this curation that you guys have collectively done as the beginning of a much more ambitious conversation. So it's not just what's on the walls or what you experience, it's what it generates and how you move forward. So thanks for letting us be part of your journey. And we look forward to continuing to learn and continuing to hear as you guys continue to tussle this out. We have a session at 1:30 Pacific time on food and food justice. And there are lots of overlaps with culture and food and race and equity. So I hope as many folks that have come on now can come back in a couple of hours and join us for that. And again, we are in the chat, the information is there if you want to link into it. Also, continue to encourage people to read the Victoria Vital Signs Report, which touches on all these issues. So thanks, gang. Really, Mayor Helps. Thank you for your leadership on this topic. Thanks to Joshua, Sylvia, Chris, and Charity. Thanks for being part of this conversation. And as we always say, this is just the beginning. The conversation doesn't end. It's just the start. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.